to Relationship Helpers. This is Laura and Vincent Ketchy. In today's podcast episode, we interview Barry Ham. And this interview really, to me and to Vincent, is reminiscent of the song Cats in the Cradle. It's a song by Harry Chapin, and in the song, we basically get the story of a man who has a family. He has a son. Throughout the course of the song, we hear the child grow up, basically. And by the end of the song, the child has grown up and living his own life.
Right.
But throughout the course of the entire song, we're hearing about how busy the parents are and not present.
Well, this is specifically the father.
Yeah,
that
specifically.
song, specifically the father.
Father, yes.
And it's a father-son relationship, and it's really a very deep song to be a, what would you call a classic rock song?
Well, no,
or
it's
maybe
a folk song. It's a
okay,
folk
it's a folk song. Okay.
It is a folk song, but it really, if you pay attention to the lyrics, it really kind of puts your heart in your throat.
Really?
I know.
Yeah.
I was listening to it the other day, and it really got me. Of course, I've got a 1-year-old, but
Right.
the reason this song pertains so well to Barry Ham's interview today is because it makes you think, or I hope it makes you think, about being intentional about the relationships you have in your life. And that's exactly what Barry is talking about here in the interview. He's talking about living life on purpose, living on purpose.
Right. So in this interview, Barry talks about marriage, about being intentional with your marriage relationship, and also being intentional in your parenting relationship, what you're doing with your kids, how you're communicating with them. But then also we get into, in the latter part of the interview, really being intentional in life, meaning all your relationships, your work relationship, and of course, being intentional in your relationship with God, where you're actually taking the time to understand Him more.
And that means listening.
It means, yes.
And that's the cool thing about today's interview, because we start out with the interview about him talking about how married couples should communicate well and listen well to each other.
What did you say, Laura?
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sorry. That's
But
true.
by the end of the interview, he's talking about how we should listen to God. And that means not just us talking at Him, kind of like we talk at our spouses and then don't listen to our spouses. The same thing applies with our relationship with God. We shouldn't just be talking at God, making all these requests,
Right.
but actually having a give and take, actually speaking and listening.
Right, taking the time actually to hear God.
So we hope that you enjoyed today's interview. I think that you're going to find some good nuggets in this one.
Right. Make sure you go to our page, relationshiphelpers.net, for the show notes.
Thanks and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Relationship Helpers. I'm your host, Vincent Ketchy. Today I have with me Dr. Barry Ham. Dr. Ham is a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been practicing over 35 years. He has a master's degree in psychology from Abilene Christian University, a master's degree in marriage and family and child counseling from California State University, and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Southern California University. He's also an author and speaker and has written 3 books: God Understands Divorce, Unstuck, Escaping the Rut of a Lifeless Marriage, and his latest book, Living on Purpose. Thank you for being with us here today, Dr. Ham.
Well, thanks for having me, Vincent. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and your expertise.
Well, I live in Colorado, and I've been here in Colorado in private practice here for the last 20 years, and have worked, done adolescent counseling, have worked with high at-risk students in some school districts. In more recent years, though, I've worked primarily with couples and families, and that's the predominance of my practice now is that. I also teach at Colorado Christian University, where I teach marriage and family as well as some other psychology classes.
Okay, so you've been teaching recently, working with lots of couples and lots of married individuals.
Absolutely.
So what kind of issues are you working with these couples?
You know, most of the time it's your pretty, I say run of the mill. For those couples, it doesn't feel run of the mill.
Right.
But typical couple issues. I mean, ranging from difficulties communicating. Matter of fact, I met with a new couple yesterday, and they have parenting struggles with their young children. But more often than not, it's couples that have just gotten in places where they're no longer connecting, and sometimes they haven't been connecting for, sadly, 10, 15, 20 years. And they've just gotten to the place where they realize we got to do something, because they find themselves feeling as though they've got a choice. They can either remain miserable for the rest of their lives, or they can get a divorce. And neither one of those options looks very good. And so they come in wanting to see if there might be a third option, some other way to do this.
So you've got a lot of couples that have been dealing with these issues for a number of years, many times a decade or more, and they're coming to kind of this point to where they've got to make a decision, either work on it or not work on it.
And that's really true. And sometimes I have to work to lead them to that place of wanting to work on it, because as I know you've experienced, couples oftentimes come in not necessarily wanting to work on it as much as they want me to point the finger at their spouse with them and get their spouse to work on it. And as I tell couples sometimes, I think they think in the ceiling of my office there's some kind of container that will drop fairy dust on them and it'll just make things better without them having to do anything.
Yeah, you feel like they come in and they want you to make a judgment, who's right and who's wrong.
They really do. I told my wife recently, I said, I'm thinking about sometimes I need to walk in with a referee shirt and tell them this is not what I'm here for. So.
Right. Yeah, I have the same experience. I have a lot of couples after my first session, they say, that's not what I thought it was going to be like. They were expecting me to come up with a verdict or whatever judgment of who was right, who was wrong, and I'm like, well, I'm sure both of you are wrong, and I'm sure both of you are probably right.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. They come in and they really think that I'm going to see the things that they see. And between the two of us, we're going to be able to help their spouse to see the light that they're 100% at fault. And that's just not the way that it works.
Right. Yeah. I know with my couples, one thing I like to do is they're telling me about what's wrong with their spouse, and their spouse is sitting right there about, 4 or 5 feet away.
Right.
One thing that I do is I slow them down and I say, okay, no, don't tell me that. I don't live with you. I don't want to hear it. Tell
That's
them.
right.
And I have them slow down and tell each other, and then I, have them do the reflective listening to each other and make sure the other one understands it.
And that's just a great point. You mentioned reflective listening, and couples come in so many times with decades, their entire lives, dysfunctional communication, and they really have no idea what healthy communication looks like, and we have to begin a retraining process to help them address that.
Right, yeah, and I know I've had some that were, these people are highly educated, some that are doctors who've been to school for, 2 decades or however long it takes to be, all the way up. And until we do this process on the couch, they don't, and I ask them, I said, so after they finish, I want you to give a summary of what you heard. And I have many of them, and it's alarmingly how many that the other person has to repeat it maybe 2 or 3 times before they can actually give a summary. Right.
Yeah, because it's so difficult to basic things that we take for granted because we do this for a living, but the basic things I think sometimes you ask somebody maybe how they feel about something,
right,
and they'll tell you what they think. That they're so out of touch with their feelings that you have to work 2 and 3 times back and forth to get them to get to a feeling place.
Right, it's hard for them to actually understand what their feelings are, and they don't listen to the other person. And I proved that point, and some of them have come out of there and said, I didn't realize I was that bad of a listener. That's what they're saying. They're like, oh, my goodness.
Well, so many times people are intent on making sure the other person understands their position, and if their goal would be for them to understand their spouse's position as opposed to them being so determined to get across their point, they would make far more headway.
Yeah, so the marriage would be a lot better if they really studied the other person and tried to understand who the other person was, how they felt, and who they are.
Right, absolutely.
So tell me about what is one of your big techniques, I guess, or technique that seems to work well with married couples that come in to see you.
I wish I could say it's something that would be some profound new truth, but the reality is when I can teach I can teach couples some basic communication skills, but when I can get couples to regularly use iMessages and reflective listening, their relationship can be radically changed because they are so out of touch with those areas of how to communicate that 50% of their problems go away once they learn and start using those skills.
Yeah, so getting couples to actually take responsibility for their feelings using those I statements.
Right. Getting them to be, it's really about being honest about their emotions because they're so used to being, I call it dishonest with their emotions. I mean, saying things like, you make me so mad, Vincent, because that way, if I can put that on your plate, I'm off the hook. I'm free and clear. And so rather than own my own emotions, I try to put them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. So they're being dishonest not only to the other person, but really to themselves.
Absolutely.
So during your counseling, what would you say? Tell us a story maybe when you had some an aha moment or some valuable insight came to you all of a sudden.
Well, I'll tell you, better yet, I'll tell you when some aha insight came to my client.
Okay.
I think about an individual I was with yesterday where we've been talking about some of these very things that you and I are discussing, as well as talking about how to set some appropriate, healthy boundaries. And this person has been manipulated by a mom and by some siblings and stuff for decades, and beginning to use some of these basic skills, beginning to set some basic boundaries. She came in yesterday and said, "Gosh, this stuff works." Because she's starting to get resistance from her mom. Is her mom's unable to manipulate her anymore? This individual's 40 years old.
Right. Yes.
But as her mom's not able to manipulate her, she's seeing that the health of this is astounding for her, and so it's like the veil has fallen off of her eyes, and she's pretty excited about it.
Yeah, so when you have these clients who actually do the homework, actually do the work that you're talking about, that you're in session, and they actually apply it outside of section, that really brightens up their life.
Oh, yeah, and you love it when in session they start to say, my mom or my husband or my wife, they made me feel, and then they stop themselves and say, no, they didn't make me feel anything. I felt this, and you're going, yes, they're getting it. That's good.
Yeah, they're taking ownership right there. They're actually stopping mid-thought.
Right, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, it's always enjoyable for me, I think, when I see couples who actually do that start putting into practice a lot of these healthy skills, just relationship skills, like you said, reflective listening or setting up these healthy boundaries with their family members, which many times as you were saying in the very beginning, I think part of us as a counselor is being an encourager and kind of putting that energy in there saying, yes, it's healthy. Yes, you can do it. Look at these positives here. You have done this. You can do this here.
Yeah, they can. And it requires consistent work because it's easy for them to get their head around some of these skills, and they use them well for a couple of weeks.
Right.
And then they kind of get comfortable and they default pattern don't work, then they come back in and say, gosh, I don't know what happened. It's a disaster again. And there's some real clear reasons why it's that, because it's so easy to default when we're in emotional situations. Rather than think, we just default to what we can know and we can do without thinking. So there has to be, it requires some intentional, consistent effort to get to a place to where it becomes second nature for them.
So many times we default to that actions or behaviors that are easy thinking. They don't require a lot of mental thought.
Yeah, not a lot of. When we default back, it's almost like muscle memory. When we default back to those old patterns, we don't have to think.
Right.
We can blame people and not take ownership with the best of them without any critical thinking skills. We can just go there.
Tell us what would you say was the most effective relationship skill that you mentioned the reflective listening, you mentioned the I statements. Is there other maybe effective relationship skill that you see that your married couples use or your individual clients use?
Well, I think, guys, every situation is so different.
Right.
I think beginning oftentimes with those communication skills. From there, we might wind up with looking at boundary setting and how to set healthy boundaries and not take responsibility for other people's not liking our boundaries. Gosh, I think about one couple recently where they realized as they would get into arguments, these arguments would start at 9 o'clock in the evening, and suddenly at 3 in the morning, they are still at it, and they're dropping verbal hand grenades on each other and blowing up things. And they realized, we're good for about an hour in an intense discussion, and after that, all bets are off. All the things we promised we wouldn't say, that we wouldn't do when we got mad, we're just going for the win at that point, and they're saying all the things that are hurtful and damaging. And so we came up with an idea with them where they've got a sacred contract, and they put together a contract of some preventative things they're going to do, and one of them was, when we get into an intense discussion and we realize it's an intense discussion, we're going to start the clock in essence, and if we've not solved it after an hour, we're going to agree to table it and come back to it, whether it's later in the day or the next day, because they know they don't do their best stuff after an hour. And that's hard for some people because they want to solve it right now. But if they don't use wisdom in that, they'll do more damage than they will good.
So their energy kind of wanes after like an hour or so, and they go back to these unhealthy negative patterns.
That's a great way to describe it. They're good. They're good being intentional for about an hour. Then they default to old patterns that don't work.
Yeah. So setting that boundary for them after an hour to table it, rest, and then come back to it seemed to really help them, or be much healthier way for them to work through issues.
Yeah, to table it, to rest, but also they get away from it for a while, and their brains are still percolating on it, but they're able to kind of process what their spouse was saying, what their thinking is, and able to consider it in a little different light when they're out of the heat of the battle.
So it's really just slowing them down.
That's a big part of it, yes.
Yeah, for the whole process, and not seeing it as something that has to be done right then, but slowing them down into thinking about the whole issue.
Yeah, we are in such an immediate gratification culture that even in the midst of a fight with your spouse, many times you don't want to slow it down. You want to solve it right now. And if I can't solve it right now, then I'll blow it up. And we get kind of ridiculous with it sometimes.
Right, yeah. And I was talking in another interview with Tracy Lamperti, and we were mentioning how this busyness is, I don't know, but, maybe one of Satan's ways of keeping us from actually having deeper thoughts. Actually, of looking at things in a deeper, healthier way. So as long as we're busy, we're doing what he wants us to do, and really keeping us from having these higher thoughts, I guess.
Well, and you talk about we get so busy, and we don't want to take the time to think it through, even the days for a lot of people of picking up the newspaper and reading the news. No. I'll get my news and my facts from Facebook posts that don't take any time, and we know how that plays out.
Right. Yeah, there's not really researching to get good information or healthy information.
Right. We want everything right now without any effort.
Right. Well, tell us about what you are most excited about today. What's your current passion?
Current passion? Oh gosh, that's a great question. I mean, my current passion, pretty consistently, is I want to see, when it comes to relationships, I want marriages saved. I mean, I see so many people whose marriages are falling apart, and the way that takes out the kids and the relatives. I mean, the ripple effect of that, and the damage that it does long term for people. That we have the ability as individuals and how we relate to our mates to not just save our marriages, but save our marriages to be something that's engaged, vibrant, exciting. And when we do that, we impact our culture. We impact our family, first of all. We raise healthier kids, but we impact our culture because we set an example for our culture, really, of a model, of a reflection of what God desires for his relationship to be like with his people when we model by healthy marriages. And so we can change the world if we can learn to do our marriages. So I'm pretty passionate about that.
Yeah, so you're passionate about having these healthy marriages so that with these healthy marriages, you have healthy individuals and, of course, healthy children if they have healthy children. I know that's one of my passions is making sure the children are healthy. I used to work at a children's home, and I was just dismayed by the such unhealthy families, unhealthy marriages that these children would come from, and the children are really just a result, many times, at least, meeting with a lot of children, I know you have as well, of these unhealthy marriages.
Right.
If the marriages many times are healthy, then the children many times are healthier.
Sure, because the children watch what's modeled for them. They learn about how to do relationships by watching their parents. And if those parents don't know how to do a relationship, these kids carry those same lack of skills into their future relationships as well, and it just perpetuates on and on and on. But if we can create healthy marriages resulting in healthy children, and really as you expand upon that, we get a healthier society.
Right. So you've got these healthy families with this husband and wife who are modeling healthy relationship skills, meaning reflective listening, meaning taking ownership for their feelings. Then you have these children who will be using those same healthy relationship skills out in society or at schools or, of course, workplaces and so forth, really making us really a healthier place.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other night when I was teaching my university class, and I made a comment about we're talking about how parents how these students were parented, and just kind of made an aside comment like, most of us came from families that put the fun back in dysfunctional because we've all come from dysfunctional families. Right. And I had one student raise his hand and he said, "No, I didn't. I really came from a very healthy, functional family." And everybody kind of looked at him like, "Wow, well, where did you come from? Are you an alien?" Because we just don't experience that much in our culture, it seems like.
So like the American culture really seems to be suffering, I guess, from all this busyness or all this seemingly progress, I guess, in the minds of, I don't know, the outside world, or at least from maybe companies, I guess, that are selling these products or these ideas.
Yeah. Well, we've got families that families that are truly stuck, and they don't have the skills and don't know how to disengage from that. And like I said, then they're confronted with, what do I do with that? Do I just hunker down and do 40, 50 years of this stuckness? Or do I do something different to re-engage us, to create what I had hoped it would be in the very beginning of this marriage?
Yeah, I believe you mentioned that in your latest book about how people kind of get stuck in that rut of, I'm supposed to do this, I go to elementary school, middle school, I'm not supposed to do much, or I'm not supposed to stand out so I can just survive. High school, I'm just supposed to get grades so I can go to college, and college to get a job that'll pay the bills, and then I'm married so I can have kids.
Yeah, and really, that's you're talking about some things from the latest book, Living on Purpose, and people do those things you're just talking about, Vincent. They do what they think is expected of them, and they go on, they get married, they have the 2.5 kids, they have the red brick house and the white picket fence and the dog, and they go to their job they hate for 30, 40 years, just so they can retire to go drive around in their RV. And then they reflect back at 80 years old, and you say, why did you do all those things? And they say, I thought I was supposed to. And they never gave it much thought than that, why they're here on this planet.
Yeah, and some of them that don't, and I know I have a few couples, they're kind of in their 50s, and they're up to this point where there's this kind of, or they're in their mid 40s, 50s, and they're kind of disillusioned by their last 20, 30 years of this. And where their marriage is at, and not just where their marriage is at, but where their relationships with their children, where just their whole life is. They're at this point where they don't feel fulfilled, I guess.
They don't, and I'm seeing a lot of individuals now that are maybe more in my age bracket who are starting to get to the retirement years, and people that have looked forward to it. They talk about can't wait to retire, and then they're retiring and they're looking around and they're going, now what? Well, kind of bored. I'm twiddling my thumbs. What am I supposed to do here?
Yeah, they're not satisfied with that supposedly going to be the happy time. They were drudging through this whole work life to get to this happy time of retirement, and now it's not what it seemed to be, or what it seemed supposed to be, I guess.
Well, I think that the bottom line is God put us here to serve. Mm-hmm. God put us here to make a difference in people's lives. And if I get to a retirement place and I unplug from what God put me here for, and now my feet are just propped up, and that's not fulfilling. Mm-hmm. I mean, we think, oh, yeah, I want to lay on the beach and sip my cold drink and not have any worries or cares. But that's fun for about a week. And then we're going, I need to get back to doing something and making a difference. Mm. And if I don't have that aspect of life, people are pretty disillusioned.
Mm. So what would be your advice? Let's say a married couple, they're in their mid-30s, and they're at this point where they feel like they're in this just kind of rat race or just, I don't know, the hamster on the wheel. What would be your advice to them at this time in their life?
Well, not to be self-marketing or anything, but honestly, I would encourage people to get a copy of this new book, Living on Purpose. This book came out of my own experiences probably 30, 35 years ago, before I got to a point in my, I was probably 30-ish, and had become disillusioned with how people treated each other, became disillusioned with how people related in the church, and really went on a frantic search to try to understand what God wanted us to do. What was God even involved in our lives? And out of that, without the short version is, out of that came the principles that Living on Purpose is built around. And so this book kind of does some of the heavy lifting of looking at the principles and truths out of the scriptures to give us a clarity as to what God put us here for. It's we oftentimes think that it's a mystery, and so we're seeking God's will, and we're looking for the magic 8-ball. We're standing on our head with our nose squinched up, trying to find out the mystery of God's will. And Living on Purpose reveals it's not some puzzle. It's clear, it's knowable, it's in the scriptures. And I know a lot of people are afraid to dive into the scriptures because they're afraid there's things they don't understand, and they don't like feeling stupid when they read it and they don't understand it. But the book Living on Purpose really helps break it down into digestible form.
So you're saying for these people, what I'm hearing is kind of for them to slow down and actually do some reflection, such as what you did, and kind of on these principles and see how they kind of align with their purpose. Are they really going toward what they really want or what they really need as far as in God's eyes? So really taking a hard look, not just at their bottom line or their finances or where they're planning on living or where they're, or, those many decisions that mid-30 people are looking at, but really looking at a lot deeper decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I used to have a graduate school professor who would come in and every morning and he would say, "We're just on a mud ball flying through space," and that was his phrase. And really, a lot of us wonder, am I just on a mud ball that's randomly, accidentally flying through space, and I'm just here until I'm not, and that's the extent of its significance? Or did the God of the Bible put us here? And if he did, why did he put us here? Is it knowable? And I would say absolutely it's knowable. And to suddenly have, to know what my destination is, in essence, it makes the trip a whole lot more fun and a whole lot more satisfying.
So you have a lot more fulfillment when you know your purpose and you know that you're in the right path.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about it. If you and your family plan to take a trip to Disney World in Florida, you guys are excited about the trip. You're loading up the car. You've got adequate clothes and supplies and snacks and drinks and whatnot, and you're excited to go to your destination. But how excited do you think your family would be if you said, okay, we're going on vacation, everybody get in the car, and you start driving, and they say, where are we going, Dad? And you say, I don't know. They would be wanting to stop at every rest stop to go out and run around. There would be no direction, and they would find that very frustrating.
Right. So it's really kind of what I'm hearing is maybe it's spiritually irresponsible for the parents to be steering a family in maybe a direction that's not going to really nourish them spiritually later on, the children and the family.
Well, that's true, and I think it's spiritually irresponsible for myself. If I'm living my years, I get one shot at this life on earth. If I'm living my years without any thought to what it's about, I'm missing a valuable opportunity.
So we're coming down here toward the end. This is the final lap or speed round. So tell me, what has been your biggest stumbling block in your relationship with God?
Oh, that's an in-depth question. Biggest stumbling block in relationship with God. I would think for me it would have been the biggest stumbling block would have been in my earlier years. If I go back 30 or 40 years ago, where I knew what God wanted me to do, but I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted to do my own thing, and would blatantly ignore what He told me to do in areas. And then I would mangle my life. It would be crazy. I would say in my fast forward to today, and I would say, biggest stumbling block today. That's I got to ponder that for a second, Vincent.
Okay.
I think maybe the biggest stumbling block is wanting to make sure that I spend adequate time with Him. And I think, I don't know what adequate means, but I think,
right.
Martin Luther used to say, I've got so much to do today, I need to spend 2 hours in prayer. And, because he was illustrating the fact that if he's not connected to the God of the universe, he's not going to have the insight, the wisdom, the understanding, the energy to do what he needs to do today. And I hear that and I believe that. But then I struggle with, okay, I've got to hurry up and I've got to get to this call with Vincent, and so I've got 15 minutes, God. Let's get cracking here.
Right.
And I think that would be the biggest stumbling block today.
Yeah, our American culture doesn't really encourage that.
Right.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Best advice I've ever received would probably be be having to do with listening to God, because if I don't hear Him, nothing else matters. And I find myself frequently asking God for what I want, telling God what I need, and then say Amen and I'm done. And I don't spend time listening to God. And I'm impressed with men and women who have learned the skill of listening to God. I think it gives them a sense of peace that passes all understanding, as the Scriptures say.
Who do you admire the most, other than a biblical figure, and why?
Oh, who do I admire the most? I don't think of a particular celebrity or well-known figure necessarily. I mean, certainly we could think of political figures that have been around. I mean, I think of gentlemen like Mike Huckabee, and people who are genuine, who are what they appear to be. I think of people in history, such as a Mother Teresa or individuals like that who have just poured their lives into people, sacrificed their own agenda to pour their lives into people. And so I don't know that there's a particular individual, but I think there'd be a composite of people that I've watched historically, watched in current cultural times, that will probably reflect principles and characteristics that I would want to emulate.
What is your favorite book besides the Bible, and why?
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Okay, by C.S. Lewis, huh?
by C.S. Lewis, and I'll tell you why. In the course of I referred to my frantic search back in my early 30s to really get my head around why God put us here and understanding that. And I remember I'd read the Chronicles of Narnia earlier in my life. I read it to my kids growing up, but I was rereading them, and rereading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it brought me to tears. I mean, here is this fairy tale book that for kids, we think, but I'm reading it and realizing that it very clearly illustrated Aslan is Jesus. And I emotionally, I intellectually understood God's sacrifice for me with his son, but I emotionally got my head around it for the first time, and I really understood what that sacrifice was about through a children's fairy tale.
Okay, so it really spoke to you.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Well, we're down here toward the end, so please share with us some parting wisdom and the best way to contact you.
Okay. Parting wisdom. Well, I don't know that I've got a lot of wise things to say. You'd have to ask my kids or my wife, and I don't know what they'd say about that. But, the two things we've been talking a little bit about my last couple of books, and Unstuck is one that addresses the fact that our marriages, when they get to the edge of that, either whether it's the divorce cliff or the edge of where we're just going to relegate it to the trash heap and just endure, we don't have to do that. Our marriages, God designed them to be vibrant and fulfilling, and they can be. There is absolutely, I don't care what somebody's situation is, I don't care if there's been infidelity, whatever their situation, if two people are willing to come to the table, there is hope that it can be restored to what it should be. The other thing I would say is related to this most recent book, which I'm very excited about, is the fact that whether I'm 15 years old and trying to get the lay of the land for my life, whether I'm 30 and I'm starting to reevaluate what I'm doing, or whether I'm retirement age and wondering if I missed it all, it doesn't matter where you are in the journey. The best is yet to come if we're open to letting God lead us.
So what I'm hearing is your biblical principles work in any marriage if you put them into practice.
They do. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to get a hold of me is people can go to the website, and the website is livingonpurpose.net.
Okay.
And there they can contact me. They can see some free resources that we've got. They can get discounted copies of books. And there's a wealth of material there that they can
so
access.
It's livingonpurpose.com?
Net.
Oh, .net. Okay. Livingonpurpose.net. Okay. Well, thank you for being with us today on Relationship Helpers, Dr. Helm.
Thanks, Vincent. Enjoyed our time together, and you have a great day.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.